college football playoff rankings just got released. This paper's still hot. The bracket doesn't matter right now, guys, because we've got to find out who the conference champs are. Until you get those seeded, because we've got auto bids, more on that in a second, this is really meaningless. Texas A&M's a perfect example. Texas A&M's number 20 right now. Texas A&M could end up with a first-round bye if they win against Texas and they go win the SEC championship. So it doesn't really matter. If this thing worked the way it should, and you just took the top 12 whatever and no one had auto bids, then the rankings would matter. The bracket would matter, but the projected bracket doesn't matter right now. Having said that, I find it interesting as we look at the way the top 25 broke down. There's a lot of SEC teams in there. They got 8 of them in there. That's pretty normal. 5 Big Ten, pretty normal. The Big 12's got 5 teams in the top 25. And yet I'm being told the Big 12 champ could be left out of the playoff. Well, that's some garbage on the surface, but especially if you're telling me that league largely plays each other. All the contenders kind of have played each other, and a champ could emerge from a conference with 5 teams ranked in the top 25. It could be left out. What are we talking about? We'll see. 3 from the ACC, and hey, they could all make it. So, yeah, that's where we are right now. 3 G5s are ranked in the top 25. Notre Dame's in there. South Carolina's in a weird spot. So, South Carolina is number 15 right now. I got no problem with that. Like, I'm sky high on South Carolina, just like most people on the committee are. They play at number 12 Saturday. So South Carolina's number 15. They play at number 12. And so you would think that they are like really, really custom made to springboard into the top 12 potentially with a win. And I know why you think that. But here's the funny thing about that. Bama, if they beat Auburn, and Ole Miss, if they beat Mississippi State, they're both double-digit favorites. If that were to happen, those 2 teams would not have nearly as impressive a win this weekend as South Carolina would, but they both have head-to-head wins over South Carolina. So there's this weird sort of dichotomy of, okay, do we think South Carolina's the better team that just got the better win? And is that enough to vault them over a couple of teams that beat them? Or do we view those resumes still as comparable enough where head-to-head factors in? Because that's one of the age-old bits of criteria here. If you've got comparable teams, comparable resumes, that's when head-to-head factors in. And the only way you can rank one of these teams above the others in sort of a comparative analysis, if they've got a head-to-head loss with them, is the team that lost we still view as definitively better. That happens sometimes. Would it happen there? I'm also really noticing that the more this bracket comes into focus, the more you've got a Penn State just kind of floating there in the 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever range. Notre Dame, same thing. They're floating in what we would call the home field territory range. The more it becomes pretty obvious, we're going to have some cold weather home games. Teams that won't have a first-round bye, but they will have a first-round home game. Right now, the way that bracket sets up, we would see a game played in State College. We'd see one played in South Bend. Athens, Georgia is not warm in December, but compared to the other 2, relatively speaking, it is. We'd also have one in Columbus, Ohio. So there is cold weather on the horizon. Arizona State, I mean, prayers if you guys have to go to Columbus, Ohio. If you got to play Ohio State on the moon, it would be tough, but you got to play them in 25-degree weather. That's tough. The SEC champion runner-up could be left out. I'd never thought that was possible. When I first saw the way the format worked, I thought to myself, well, the SEC champion will always be in, the Big Ten champion will always be in, but also the other team that plays in that conference title game will be in. Because I just thought to myself, there's not a world where a team is good enough to make it to Atlanta, but not be good enough to still be in the top 12 when all is said and done, even if they lose. But we are in that world, and I'm not disagreeing with it. We are in a world where A&M's at 20. They play Texas this weekend. If they beat them, which is their only route to Atlanta, if they beat them, they would jump up. They probably wouldn't jump up into the top 12 or top 10 or whatever, and that's important because at that point, my own personal theory is in play there. You know, my theory has always been, you can't punish a team for losing a conference title game. But what I've always meant by that, if I haven't clarified it enough, I will now, is if you're in the top 12 and you lose your conference title game, especially in the SEC or the Big Ten, you should not be punished and dropped. I don't think A&M would even be in the top 12 in that scenario. So if they lose to Georgia, they would be out of the playoff, but that's because they never would have been in the playoff before the game. My problem is going to be if we get to some year, maybe this year, maybe another year, where you're like number 10 and you lose the conference title game and they drop you to 14 or 13, then I got a big problem. But having said that, you notice I keep specifying the SEC and the Big Ten. It's because I think those conferences will be given preferential treatment. And due to the quality of team and quality of schedule in those conferences, I get it. They're deeper conferences. Whether you like that or not, that's true. I think they could do this to an ACC runner-up. I think they could do this certainly to a Big 12 runner-up. They may keep the Big 12 champion out. I don't think that'll happen, but some people do think that'll happen. But, man, Notre Dame's sitting there right now at number 5. You know Notre Dame's got the 5th best odds to win it all. Now, there's a little drop-off between 4 and 5, but Notre Dame's number 5. Hey, do you think if they lose to USC, they drop all the way out? I do, depending on how it shakes out behind them. I do. 6.5 to a 7.5 point favorite, depending on when you've looked at that line this week. Notre Dame plays at USC this weekend. Do they, at the College Football Playoff Committee headquarters, do they really mean what they say when they say we will not care if we put a rematch in the first round? We will not care if it's conference versus conference in the first round. I think they kind of mean it, but I also don't think they 100% mean it. Like if you have watched a movie before and you've seen this guy tell this girl, I would never be unfaithful to you, but then this really extreme kind of circumstance, exception to the rule factor enters the equation and he's unfaithful. Well, he didn't really mean that he'd never be unfaithful. And shame on him, by the way. We do not support infidelity of any kind on this program. However, we also understand in the College Football Playoff Committee room, they speak in absolutes. They say we will never factor in whether it's a rematch or not when we're seeding this. But I think they may. I think they may. And the other thing to keep in mind, and I'm not sure where the committee would fall on this, but like right now, we have got an SEC versus SEC in the first round, Tennessee, Georgia, and we've got a Big Ten in the first round, Indiana, Penn State. Now, obviously, that guarantees those major conferences that one of their teams is knocked out in the first round. I don't think they love that. Now, it shouldn't matter. You guys are screaming right now. You're saying, there he goes, being preferential to the big conferences. I'm not. I'm telling you, it shouldn't matter. What I'm doing is I'm asking, but will it matter? That's what I'm asking. Indiana's in this thing, by the way. That was one of the big takeaways. We got a lot of folks watching the show, by the way. I appreciate it. Do me a favor. Check and see if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. If you're not, the only Christmas present I ask for is that you click the subscribe button. If you're listening on podcast, click that follow/subscribe button. And if you think you're already subbed, chances are you may not be. It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't sign you up for anything. It just makes sure we can bring the show to you year-round free of charge. So that's all I ask. Indiana's in this thing, man. I was very speculative last week. If they lost, would they be out? Well, everyone else fell behind them. So not only are they in, I was listening to Ward Manuel talk on the playoff reveal show. He said their body of work warrants them being in. I agree now. I agree. The circumstances changed around Indiana. So now I agree. There's still a lot to sort out. Everyone's had this mentality all week. I don't know if you've sensed this or maybe you've reflected this. Everyone's just talking about the playoff, and the games are still happening. Everyone's talking about conference championships, and the regular season is still happening. Miami's not in the conference title game yet. Guys, they've still got to play Syracuse. So the Big 12's certainly not sorted out. Ohio State's not in the Big Ten title game. They've still got to beat Michigan. Now, you may think they're going to, but I guarantee you thought a lot of things would happen last week. I know I did. And then all of a sudden they didn't. Shame on the script writers for making a fool out of me last week.